This is my video for Lab Series 1. There are two separate labs in this series. The first one is a qualitative analysis of acids and bases. So the students will look at different observable qualities of household items. And then the second lab is a quantitative analysis of acids and bases. So they'll be more focused on the pH. The context for these labs, they both occur in my acids and base unit at different points. So the qualitative lab occurs at the beginning of the unit, so before we've discussed anything. It's just to allow them to explore some different household items to see what qualitative properties they have in common. So they're going to be looking for patterns and trying to classify things as acids or bases based on those patterns. And then the second lab occurs a little bit later in the unit, and it's a quantitative lab. So after we discuss pH and hydrogen and hydroxide concentrations, they're going to use the pH probe to measure the pH of the same acids and bases that they used in the first lab, and then they're going to turn those measurements into hydrogen and hydroxide calculations. For the next generation science standards, I found two that sort of applied. There isn't a specific standard for acids and bases, but this first one kind of talks about how changing the concentration will change things. So that kind of goes with how we change the concentration of an acid as a base and how that changes the different properties that we were observing. And then the second one comes in a little bit later, but it's focusing on the students designing solutions to real-world problems. So after they know how to distinguish between acids and bases, how can they use that information in the real world? There are several processes and skills that I would like the students to learn from doing these two labs. So kind of the overall content goal, I want them to understand the properties of acids and bases. The scientific skill goals, I want them to understand how to use the pH probes. So our school has vernier equipment. They will have used some of that equipment with different probes. This is just introducing the pH probes and making sure they know how to rinse them off between different liquids and are letting them set long enough to get accurate readings. They also need to know how to carry out investigations. So can they follow a procedure? Can they record the information accurately? And then the final one is using the information they gather to perform different calculations related to acids and bases. Technical skills involved, taking accurate qualitative and quantitative observations. So specifically with the qualitative, making sure they're being specific, so not just saying green, maybe saying dark green or pine green. And then with the quantitative, make sure that they are waiting long enough to get good readings and that they are using the correct number of significant figures when they are doing their calculations. So now we'll take a look at the two lab sheets that the students will get. So the first lab is the qualitative properties of acids and bases. They'll start with a pre-lab. So the first question is just, what is qualitative data? This is something we would have talked about at the beginning of the year. This is just to kind of remind them that they will be looking for descriptions of things during this lab, not numbers. And then so this lab I'm using with my juniors in their chemistry class. We did talk about acids and bases a little bit their 8th grade and freshman year. Remember, so again, this is for everyone. Just to look at them, we're going to use substances drink in the chemistry, but you know they're going to do a bit more specific. We discussed we can take that and we can vernier pH, same variety that they be vernier pH hydroxide lab. So some unique features of this lab, it allows students to interact with household items. So we're not just using weird acids and bases that they may or may not be able to pronounce. It's things that they see every day. Maybe something that they'll remember, you know, when they open the kitchen cabinet and see vinegar and, I don't know, make a connection to its pH. The other unique feature is it connects the mathematical calculations that we're talking about in class to actual substances. So I could very easily have just given them a worksheet and said, vinegar has a pH of this, calculate this, but this gives them a chance to actually measure that pH and then do the calculations. There were 3 reasons that I included these 2 labs into the acid and base unit. The first one was to show the importance of being descriptive in your observations, so being really specific about the stuff you were observing so that it distinguishes the substances from each other. The second one was to give more practice with calculations, so we'll discuss it in class, they'll do some practice, and then this lab gives them a second chance to actually interact with the stuff that they're performing calculations for. Third thing was it introduces new technology. So we're taking the vernier equipment that we have, but we're adding the pH probes to that and how to properly use and store them. Thanks for listening to my summary of Lab Series 1. I'm sorry if I talked really fast. I tend to do that in these videos. I look forward to your comments on what I can improve on. Thanks.